Yo, what is going on, everyone? Today we have another Rick and Morty video. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and watch till the end.
There is a small house somewhere in a quiet American suburb, and inside that house, sitting in a garage that has been converted into a laboratory, is the smartest man in the entire universe. He smells like bourbon. He is talking to himself in a half-mumble, half-genius monologue that would take any other scientist on the planet 10 years to decode. His grandson is nearby, nervous and wide-eyed, asking if they can please just stay home today. And somewhere in the background, a television is playing, the family is arguing, and the whole setup looks, on the surface, like the beginning of a joke. But here's the thing about Rick and Morty. It is not a joke. Or rather, it is a joke that has a second door hidden behind it. And behind that second door is something that is going to stay with you long after the credits roll and the screen goes dark. It is a show about a drunk grandfather dragging his anxious grandson through interdimensional chaos, and it is also, quietly, carefully, almost sneakily, one of the most profound explorations of what it means to be a human being that has ever been put on television. That sounds like a grand claim. It is, it is a grand claim. But I want you to think about why Rick and Morty hit so many people so hard. Not the loud, obvious fans who memorized catchphrases. Not the people who had the Pickle Rick meme saved on their phones. I mean the people who watched a specific scene late at night, alone, and felt something shift in their chest. Oh, the people who looked at Rick sitting at his workbench at the end of autoerotic assimilation, face down on the desk, completely still, having just barely survived something he did to himself, and felt a recognition that they were not entirely comfortable with. The people who watched Morty bury his own dead body in a backyard, in a dimension he would have to pretend was home for the rest of his life, and felt the particular cold clarity of understanding what that scene was actually about. Because Rick and Morty is doing something that very few pieces of entertainment have ever had the nerve to do. It is asking the real questions. Not the easy ones, not the comfortable ones, not the ones with tidy answers. It is asking what happens when you use your intelligence to run from yourself. And it is asking whether the life you chose is the life you actually want, or whether you chose it because you were afraid of finding out. It is asking what love looks like when it is not glamorous, when it is not rewarded, when it is not even acknowledged. It is asking whether there is any point to any of it, and then, this is the part that matters most, it is suggesting that maybe the question itself is the wrong one to start with. Over the next 2 hours, we are going to move through the lore of Rick and Morty the way you would move through a long, quiet dream. We are not rushing through trivia. We are not listing episodes in order. We are going to let the show breathe, and we are going to listen to what it is actually saying, underneath the burps and the portal guns and the alien governments and the screaming. Because what it is actually saying, lesson by lesson, moment by moment, is something that applies to your life. Not a version of your life set in a fictional multiverse. Your actual life in your actual house with the actual people you love and the actual problems you are either facing or avoiding right now. It is worth spending a moment at the very beginning acknowledging what kind of show we are dealing with. Because Rick and Morty has attracted a specific kind of misreading that obscures what makes it remarkable. On the surface, and this is not a mistake, the show works very hard at the surface level to be genuinely funny. It looks like nihilism dressed up in science fiction. Two guys jump through portals. Aliens exist. Nothing matters, probably. Every episode ends with things reset or broken in new ways. And the family keeps absorbing the damage without anyone having the kind of epiphany that most stories promise, as the reward for paying attention. But the show is not nihilistic. It is something more interesting and more honest than nihilism. It is the story of a universe that relentlessly demonstrates that nothing is guaranteed and nothing is cosmic and nothing is there to protect you. And then, inside that bleakness, finds the specific human things that persist anyway. Love persisting. Loyalty persisting. The small gestures of kindness that no one asked for and no one rewarded that persist because the person doing them simply decided that was the kind of person they wanted to be. The show is not saying nothing matters. It is saying the only things that matter are the ones you choose to matter. And in the choosing is harder and more costly and more beautiful than you were told it would be. The show has been described by critics and academics as an exploration of existentialism, nihilism, and absurdism, and all three labels contain real truth. Rick Sanchez operates from a nihilistic framework much of the time. His belief that objective meaning does not exist in the universe is genuine, and the show does not argue against it at the factual level. But it does argue against the conclusion Rick draws from that belief, which is that caring is therefore pointless. The show's counter-argument is not philosophical. It is just Morty, scared and trembling, choosing to go through the portal anyway. It is Bird Person staying loyal across decades of circumstances that would have given anyone else a reason to leave. It is Mr. My poopy butthole getting back up. These things do not prove that the universe has meaning. They demonstrate something more useful, that meaning is made, not found. That the capacity to care about something, to show up for someone, to do the boring daily work of being a person in relationship with other people, this capacity exists in humans regardless of what the universe around them does or does not provide. And the choice to exercise it, in full knowledge of the universe's indifference, is not naive. It is the most defiant thing a human being can do. The show is quieter about this than its reputation suggests. It hides the tenderness under absurdity and noise. But it is there in every episode, patient and consistent, waiting for you to stop looking at the surface long enough to notice what is underneath it. This is going to be slow. It is going to be quiet. And it is going to be, I hope, one of those videos that you come back to on a night when you need something that feels true. Let us begin with Rick, because everything in this universe, every lesson the show has ever told, traces back to that one man sitting in that one garage, being the smartest person alive, and being absolutely miserable about it. Lesson 1. Intelligence without wisdom is a prison. Rick Sanchez is the smartest being in the universe. Not the smartest human being. Not the smartest creature on Earth. The smartest being across every dimension, every universe, every possible reality that has ever existed or ever will. He built a portal gun that lets him step between dimensions, the way you step between rooms. He has created life, destroyed worlds, escaped from governments and gods and entities that operate on levels of power that the rest of us cannot even begin to conceptualize. He once turned himself into a pickle, just a small, green, ordinary pickle, and then engineered his way out of a sewer using the bodies of rats, constructed a suit of armor from dead vermin, and fought his way through an entire heavily guarded government compound because he was bored and because it was slightly less unpleasant than going to family therapy. That is who Rick Sanchez is. He is genuinely, cosmically extraordinary. And he is, at the same time, one of the most devastated characters in the history of television. This is the first lesson the show is teaching, told across every single episode in 1,000 different ways, and so quietly and so consistently that it is easy to miss unless you are paying attention. The lesson is this: intelligence without wisdom is not a gift. It is a prison with very comfortable walls. Rick can solve any problem in the universe except the ones that matter. He can build a device that cures every disease on a planet. He cannot hold a conversation with his daughter without flinching away from the truth. He can calculate the exact probability of any outcome across an infinite number of timelines. He cannot calculate why he is still alone. He can escape from the most secure prison in the galaxy using only a toilet and his own ingenuity. He cannot escape from the version of himself he built out of grief after Diane died. Diane. The show takes a long time to give us the full picture of Rick's backstory, and it earns every revelation carefully. What we come to understand, pieced together across seasons, is that Rick was not always the nihilistic, half-drunk, untouchable genius we meet at the beginning of the show. He was once a young man who was happy. He had a wife named Diane. He had a daughter named Beth. He was a scientist working on teleportation technology, and his life had warmth and structure and the particular ordinary richness of a person who has chosen their life consciously and found that it fits. He chose his family over his ambition when it came to it. He said no to a version of himself who came offering the secrets of interdimensional travel because Rick already had what he needed. And then they were taken from him. A bomb through a portal, sent by the very Rick he had refused to become. At the one who would eventually be known as Rick Prime, destroyed his house and killed Diane and Beth in an instant. And that was the moment when Rick Sanchez, the ordinary man with a happy life, became Rick Sanchez, the genius who decided that nothing would ever hurt him again by deciding that nothing mattered. He did not grieve cleanly. He innovated. He spent years hunting down Rick Prime, building his own portal gun, murdering alternate versions of himself one by one, searching for the specific signature of the one responsible. He helped to create the Citadel of Ricks, that strange interdimensional society of genius mad scientists, not because he believed in it, but because it gave him cover and resources for the hunt. Every grand, world-altering thing Rick did in those early years was grief wearing a tool on its belt. And every invention was a hammer for finding the man who took everything. Every escape was practice for the one escape that mattered, which was escaping the reality that they were gone. And when he finally gave up on finding Rick Prime because the trail went cold because Prime had made himself impossible to catch, Rick did not know what to do. He had built his entire identity on the hunt. And with the hunt gone, he had nothing but the smartest brain in any universe and no reason to use it for anything that mattered. So he drank, and he wandered, and eventually he crashed his ship into the garage of a Beth Smith, whose own Rick had abandoned her years before, and he tried, very imperfectly, very drunkenly, very much while pretending he was not trying at all, to fill a hole that he had been carrying for decades. This is who is living in the Smith family garage. Not a cool renegade genius. A man in unbearable pain who has learned to use his intelligence as armor so effectively that he can no longer tell where the armor ends and the person begins. The show makes this clear in one of its most celebrated episodes, Pickle Rick. On the surface, it is a gleefully absurd story about a man who transforms himself into a small green vegetable to avoid going to family counseling. Underneath, it is a precise portrait of what happens when a person is so afraid of their own emotional reality that they would rather subject themselves to physical extremity than sit still in a room and be asked how they are feeling. The absurdity of the premise is the point. Rick is the smartest man in the universe, but he has access to technology that could accomplish literally anything. And the most inventive use he can find for all of that power on a given morning is to turn himself into a pickle so that he cannot attend a single therapy session. The greatest mind in all of creation, deployed in service of avoidance. And then there is that scene. Dr. Wong, the therapist voiced by Susan Sarandon, calm and unhurried and absolutely unintimidated by anything Rick can throw at her, delivers what might be the most psychologically accurate diagnosis of a fictional character ever put on screen. She does not try to out-argue him. She does not try to make therapy sound exciting. She simply reflects his situation back to him with clinical precision. Rick, she says, the only connection between your unquestionable intelligence and the sickness destroying your family is that everyone in your family, you included, use intelligence to justify sickness. You seem to alternate between viewing your own mind as an unstoppable force and as an inescapable curse. The only truly unapproachable concept for you is that your mind is within your control. You chose to come. You chose to talk. You are the master of your universe. And yet you are dripping with rat blood and filth, your enormous mind vegetating by your own hand. She tells him that the thing about repairing and maintaining is not an adventure. There is no way to do it so wrong that you might die. It is just work. And some people are okay going to work. And some people would rather die. Each of us gets to choose. Rick sits there and says nothing. The smartest man in the universe has no response to this. Because she is exactly right, and he knows it, and even his genius cannot construct an argument that makes her wrong. This is the prison the lesson describes. Not a prison of stupidity. It is a prison of misdirected capability. Intelligence is enormously useful for a very specific range of tasks. It is useful for solving problems that have solutions. But it is completely structurally useless for the things that require you to stop figuring and simply feel, to stop building and simply be, to stop escaping and simply stay. The lesson extends well beyond Rick's fictional life. We live in a culture that worships intelligence almost unconditionally. We use cleverness to rationalize our avoidances. We use analysis to explain away our loneliness. But we use productivity to justify the fact that we have not called someone we miss in months. We use knowing about a problem as a substitute for actually doing anything about it. Rick does this on a cosmic scale. He knows exactly what is wrong with him. He can articulate it more precisely than most therapists could. He just would rather build a mech out of rat bones than fix it. There is a particularly modern version of this that the show speaks to with uncanny accuracy. We have access today to more information about human psychology, about the mechanics of relationships, about what healthy emotional functioning looks like, than any generation in human history. There are podcasts and books and therapy apps and self-help frameworks in almost unlimited supply. The amount of information about how to be well is unprecedented. And people are lonelier, more anxious, and less connected than almost any previous generation. Rick's paradox is not fictional. It is a precise description of what happens when understanding becomes a substitute for doing. When we read about vulnerability without being vulnerable. When we learn the vocabulary of our patterns without changing them. When we develop accurate theories about why we are the way we are, and then use those theories as reasons to accept the status quo. The smartest thing Rick ever does in the entire show is not any invention or any escape. It is the quiet, almost invisible moment in certain late episodes where he simply chooses to stay, to not run, to sit with the discomfort of being loved when he does not feel he deserves it, and to let it happen anyway. That is where the real intelligence lives. Not in the portal gun, in the willingness to stop running long enough to find out what you are running from. Lesson 2. Running from pain only makes it catch you. You. The universe of Rick and Morty has infinite dimensions, infinite planets, infinite civilizations and species and realities spiraling outward in every direction. And across all of that infinite space, the one thing that persists in almost every story the show tells is the fundamental human truth that you cannot outrun yourself. Rick tries. He tries harder than anyone else in the multiverse. He has the technology to go literally anywhere, and he uses it constantly. Every time something gets too close, every time a conversation gets too real, every time a relationship demands more of him than comfort and cleverness, he opens a portal and steps through it. Yet he has done this his entire life. He did it to his daughter when she was a child. He left, and he was gone for years, and Beth grew up with an absence shaped exactly like her father, eating a hole in the middle of everything she built. He does it to Morty regularly, abandoning him to deal with the emotional aftermath while Rick grabs a drink and turns on the television. He did it to Diane even before her death, in smaller ways, choosing the thrill of the new over the quieter, more demanding work of being fully present in his marriage. And every time he runs, the thing he is running from gets slightly bigger, slightly more loaded, slightly harder to face when he eventually, inevitably, runs out of universe to escape into. The show returns to this structure with almost architectural consistency across its run. In Season 6, when Rick's portal fluid is reset and he finds himself back in his original dimension, the thing waiting for him there is a robot version of his dead wife Diane that he built and installed specifically to haunt him. Not as a companion, as a punishment. He built a thing that sounds like Diane calling from the other room, constantly reminding him of his failure to save her, urging him to pursue vengeance, keeping the wound open and infected and impossible to ignore. He ran from the grief of losing Diane, and then he built an automated version of that grief and kept it running in an empty house in an abandoned dimension, like a machine set to ensure he could never truly escape the thing he had never allowed himself to properly feel. This is the extremity of what avoidance does when it has unlimited resources and decades to work with. It does not dissolve the pain. It mechanizes it. It creates an infrastructure of suffering designed to persist indefinitely because the alternative, actually sitting with the grief, actually processing the loss, actually letting it be a thing that happened and then became something else, requires a kind of surrender that Rick has never learned how to make. The pattern is not unique to Rick. It is just that Rick is the version of it the show explores most deeply because Rick has the most extreme tools for avoidance. Most of us cannot open a portal. Most of us cannot build a robot grief machine or escape to an alternate dimension. But most of us have our own versions of the run. Work that fills every available hour. substances that soften the edges of evenings we do not want to be fully present for. That relationship's kept alive because they are less frightening than the silence of not having them. Screens and noise and constant low-level stimulation to make sure the quiet never arrives, because in the quiet, the thing we are running from has a chance to catch up. This is why the Rick Minutes episode hits the way it hits. After everything falls apart in the family, Morty goes to find Summer, who is packing to leave. And instead of offering comfort that would be dishonest, Morty tells her the truth. He tells her he is not her original brother, that this house, this family, this version of everything is not the original version for him either. That he and Rick destroyed a world and then slipped into this one because the original versions of Rick and Morty had just died and the slot was open. That he shows her the backyard where he buried his own dead body. He stands at the window, looking at the grave of himself. And then he says something that sounds like giving up and is actually the opposite of giving up. Nobody exists on purpose. Nobody belongs anywhere. Everybody's going to die. Come watch TV. What Morty is offering Summer in that moment is not nihilism. It is the thing on the other side of nihilism, which the philosophers called absurdism, and which Morty has arrived at not through reading, but through standing at a window, looking at a grave with his name on it, and deciding to have dinner anyway. The decision to not run. The decision to be here, even without a reason to be here that would satisfy the standard of cosmic significance. The decision to choose the small, present, ordinary thing over the enormous, absent, unimagined thing. Come watch TV, not as a surrender, as an arrival. The lesson in this is one of the oldest and most consistently ignored in human life. You cannot run far enough. You cannot drink deeply enough, or distract yourself thoroughly enough, or build enough walls to keep the thing you are avoiding outside forever. Grief will wait. Loneliness will wait. The specific version of yourself that you have been avoiding looking at will wait patiently in every room you step into, behind every portal you open, in every alternate dimension where you thought you might finally be free of it. Rick looks back at decades of running and finds himself in a house in an alternate dimension, sitting at a desk that is not his original desk, trying to be a grandfather to a Morty who is not his original Morty, in a family he chose by accident, surrounded by evidence of a life built entirely on top of an original life he never allowed himself to properly mourn. That is the bill for the run. That is the accumulated cost of every portal open to avoid a conversation, every adventure begun to avoid a feeling, every drink taken to make the silence less loud. The invitation the show extends, quietly and without sentimentality, is the same one it extends through Morty, standing at that window. Stop, turn around, see what is actually there. It will not kill you. It might feel for a while like it will. But the thing on the other side of facing what you have been running from is not destruction. It is just the truth. And the truth, uncomfortable as it often is the only stable ground that anything worth having can be built on. Lesson 3. The life you have versus not the life you imagined. There is an episode that the show uses to examine one of the most common and quietly corrosive ways that people make themselves miserable without noticing they are doing it. It is called Rick Minutes, and what happens in it is both very funny and very honest and worth sitting with carefully. Rick upgrades the family's cable box to receive transmissions from every conceivable reality. The family discovers they can use special goggles to watch alternate versions of themselves, living alternate versions of their lives, in dimensions where different choices were made or different circumstances prevailed. Beth watches herself as a human surgeon operating on people, brilliant and high-achieving and professional in the way she always believed she could be. Jerry watches himself as a famous actor, admired and successful and recognized by the world as someone who matters. And both of them immediately begin to grieve the life they are actually living. Because the alternate life looks better, more polished, more impressive, more the thing that a successful life is supposed to look like from the outside. And the gap between the imagined and the actual begins to fill with a grief that is not for anything that was actually lost, but for something that never existed in any form they could have accessed. Here is where the show does something devastatingly precise. It does not let the alternate lives stay at the highlight reel stage. It lets them play out. And what plays out is this. Beth's alternate self, the surgeon, the success story, the woman who did not marry Jerry, is drinking wine alone in a house full of exotic birds. She got the career, she did not get the warmth. She is alone in a professionally impressive life that has no one in it to come home to. And Jerry's alternate self, the famous actor, the man who got out of the suburb and became someone the world recognized, is having a very public and very messy psychological collapse. He strips naked in front of a crowd. His success has not made him happy. It has made him visible in a way that his fragile self-image cannot sustain. The show is not saying, be grateful for what you have, it could be worse. That is not the lesson. The lesson is more precise. The alternate life you imagine is not real. It is made entirely of the appealing parts, the visible parts, the parts that would look good in the story you tell yourself about what a successful life looks like. It cannot include the loneliness. It cannot include the compromises. It cannot include the ways that a different set of circumstances would have given you a different set of problems that you would have found just as heavy. The alternate life always cheats. It shows you the version with better lighting. This connects outward to something very recognizable in contemporary life. Social media is a machine for showing you the highlight reel of everyone else's alternate life. The pictures of the trips, the announcements of the achievements, the couples that look happy in photographs, the bodies that appear maintained, the lives that seem from the outside to be organized in ways that yours is not. None of this is fake, exactly, but all of it is selected. Nobody posts about the 3 in the morning. Nobody makes a highlight reel of the ordinary, unsatisfying, quietly difficult days. So when you look at what other people share and compare it to the full, unedited experience of being yourself, the comparison is always going to come out wrong. You are comparing their surface to your interior. You cannot win that comparison. Nobody can. Jerry and Beth run back to each other at the end of the episode. Not in a dramatic romantic gesture. They look at the alternate selves and look at each other, and something shifts. Not a celebration, a recognition. The thing they have, messy and imperfect and built on a foundation that included at least one significant mistake, is real. And real, against all the glamour of the imagined, has a value that the imagined cannot touch. The episode ends with them on the porch together, quietly. Not celebrating, not dramatically reconciling, just sitting. But being present in the specific, unglamorous, entirely real life they have. It is not triumphant. It is tender. And it is one of the most honest portrayals of what it looks like to actually choose your life instead of mourning the one you imagined. The lesson is deceptively simple. Look at what you actually have of. Not the idealized version, not the version you perform for other people, not the version you think you should want. The actual thing. The person in the next room. The work you did today. The small, specific, unremarkable details of a life that is wild instead of imagined. Look at those things clearly, and then decide from that clear-eyed place what you want to do next. Because the alternate life will always be more glamorous than your actual one. That is built into the architecture of how we imagine. But it will never be more real, and only the real one can actually give you anything. Lesson 4. Bravery only exists when you are afraid. Morty Smith is afraid of everything. This is not a flaw in the show's writing, it is the whole point. When Rick drags Morty through a portal for the first time, Morty does not want to go. He says so. He is trembling and wide-eyed, and everything about him says that his body knows, correctly, that what is about to happen is going to be frightening and dangerous and possibly lethal. He is right about all of it. And he goes anyway. Not because he has been convinced it will be fine, not because he has some special resource of fearlessness to draw on, but because Rick is already through the portal and standing still in the face of the unknown is, in its own way, also a choice. And then Morty has decided, in this moment, to move forward. That first adventure sets the template for everything that follows. Morty is afraid. Morty goes. Morty is not changed by the fear into someone fearless. He is just a person who is afraid and who shows up anyway. And the showing up is what the show gradually reveals to be the entire moral architecture of his character. We are taught relentlessly that courage is the absence of fear. The hero walks into danger with a calm smile. The warrior does not flinch. The protagonist looks the monster in the eye and feels nothing but determination. We consume these images across decades of stories, and the effect is to teach us that feeling afraid is a sign that you are not the right person for this. That the people who do the brave things are people for whom bravery is easy. That the trembling is disqualifying. Rick and Morty corrects this completely. It does it through Morty, who is afraid in almost every episode of the show's entire run, and who still shows up. Who still goes through the portal, who still stands next to Rick in situations that any reasonable person would flee. Not because he has overcome his fear, but because he has chosen to act alongside it. There is something important to notice about the specific quality of Morty's fear. It is a caring fear. Morty is afraid because he understands consequences. He understands that people can get hurt, that things can go wrong in ways that cannot be undone, that the adventures have a cost that Rick tends to distribute among people who did not consent to bear it. Morty's fear is directly proportional to his awareness of stakes, and the show begins to suggest something almost radical. This awareness of stakes is not a weakness. It is the thing that makes Morty, among all the characters in the show, the one with the most intact moral compass. Rick is fearless. Rick has no anxiety. And look at what Rick's fearlessness produces. World-ending love potions, Cronenberg dimensions, an entire planet assimilated so Rick can have a fun week. The adventures of a person with no fear and no anxiety about consequences are not a series of triumphs. They are a series of disasters that happen to someone else while Rick is having a good time. Morty's fear is the only check on that. When Morty panics, when Morty says this is a bad idea, when Morty refuses and argues and begs to go home, he is not being weak. He is being the only moral friction in a system that has none. The show has actually shown us what Morty looks like when his fear starts to erode through exposure and trauma. As the seasons go on, Morty gets more comfortable with violence, with loss, with the kinds of things that should be horrifying. He picks up weapons with less hesitation. He makes harder decisions faster. He cares less, visibly, about the people who get hurt along the way. And every single time this happens, the show frames it not as growth, but as damage. The Morty of the later seasons who can dispatch enemies without flinching is not a stronger Morty. He is a Morty who has lost pieces of himself that the adventures took without asking. The episode about Morty's memory erasing device makes this explicit. We learn that Rick has given Morty a device that removes specific memories, the worst ones, the unbearable ones. Like when the contents of those erased memories are finally shown, we understand two things at once. Morty has been through far more than we realized, and the act of erasing pain is its own form of avoidance. The pain does not disappear when the memory goes. It becomes an absence with no context, a wound without a scar, a heaviness that Morty feels without being able to explain where it came from. The show is warning us here about the cost of not being afraid, of not letting things register, of finding ways to smooth over the sharp edges of experience so that nothing hurts too much. Because the price of that smoothing is also the price of not caring as much. The fear and the care are made of the same thing. You cannot have the one without the other. For your own life, this lesson comes in the form of a reframe. Now, the next time you feel afraid of something and interpret that fear as a sign that you should not proceed, consider the possibility that you are reading the signal wrong. Not all fear is a warning. Some fear is the feeling of being at the edge of something that matters, the conversation you need to have, the risk you need to take, the relationship you need to be honest in. These things feel scary not because they are dangerous, but because they are important. And important things always feel like they could go wrong. Because they could. Morty is afraid every week. He goes anyway. And in the gap between the fear and the step forward, something that the show treats as genuinely rare and genuinely precious exists. A person who feels the weight of what they are doing and does it anyway. Not invulnerable, not fearless, just present enough, and caring enough, and courageous enough to show up. Lesson 5. Kindness is not weakness. It is the hardest thing. There is a character in this show who appears for exactly one episode, and he is one of the most precisely drawn characters in the entire series. His name is Scary Terry. He is a direct parody of Freddy Krueger. He has bladed gloves and a burned face and a hat. And he chases Rick and Morty through layers of dreamscapes with absolute murderous intent. He is terrifying. He is also, underneath all of that, a deeply insecure person having anxiety dreams about not being scary enough. The scene where Rick and Morty go into Scary Terry's dream and find him standing in front of a classroom in his underwear, trying to scare the students and failing, while his teacher tells him he is not good enough. It is one of the strangest and most affecting things the show ever does. Because it takes everything we have been primed to feel about this character, the fear and the wariness and the adrenaline of a chase sequence, and replaces it completely in about 30 seconds with something much more fragile. Not sympathy exactly, recognition. We have all been Scary Terry in our dreams. We have all stood in some version of that classroom, trying to perform a version of ourselves that the world would find acceptable, and feeling the specific shame of coming up short. The monster chasing Rick and Morty through their nightmares is having nightmares of his own. The thing threatening them is itself terrified. And here is what Rick and Morty choose to do with that knowledge. They do not use it against him. Now, they do not leverage his vulnerability to escape or to win. They help him. They stand up for him in his dream. They are kind to him in a moment when he is completely exposed, when the armor is down, when the performance has failed. They meet his vulnerability with something that costs them nothing and means everything. And Scary Terry wakes up, and he becomes their friend, just like that. The creature who is hunting them becomes someone who helps them, because someone treated him, at his lowest moment, with basic decency. This is not naive. The show is not suggesting that kindness always works or that every monster is just a scared person underneath. But it is suggesting something more specific and more useful. That kindness, deployed at the right moment with real intention, has a power that force does not. That the act of meeting someone's vulnerability with compassion instead of exploitation creates something that cannot be manufactured any other way. Mr. Poopy Butthole is the show's most sustained argument on behalf of this idea. Here is a character whose defining quality is relentless, warm, genuine positivity. He talks to the audience like they are his closest friends. He seems in a show full of cynicism and darkness and characters using their worst qualities to survive, almost impossibly out of place. He is too kind, too warm, too consistently generous in his regard for the people around him. And the episode that centers on him takes that kindness and turns it into a tragedy. The Smith house has been invaded by alien parasites that implant false memories to disguise themselves as people the family knows. But the trick is that the parasites can only create positive memories. They cannot make you remember a bad time with them. So Beth concludes that any character with only positive memories must be a parasite. And she looks at Mr. Poopy Butthole, who has never in a single interaction done anything unkind or hurtful or disappointing. And she concludes that he must be fake. She shoots him. She shoots an innocent person because his genuine, unconditional kindness was so far outside the bounds of what she understood people to actually be like that it read as impossible, as a performance with a hidden motive. The show is asking, with extraordinary directness, whether genuine kindness has become so rare that we literally cannot distinguish it from deception. In a world where everyone is assumed to want something, where every act of generosity is analyzed for hidden motive, the person who is simply, genuinely, consistently kind becomes suspect. Their goodness makes them unrecognizable. And the impulse to shoot them, not literally, not usually, but to dismiss them and assume the worst and wait for the reveal is not malicious. It is just the learned response of a world in which unconditional warmth has become genuinely hard to parse. The show then follows Mr. Poopy Butthole through his recovery. He goes to the hospital. He has a cane. Time passes and he is alone in his apartment, navigating a life that has been made harder by something done to him in good faith, by someone who is operating from the best information she had. And through all of it, he maintains his warmth. The smile is sometimes harder to hold. The affection is sometimes more effortful, but it is still there. He keeps being who he is not because the world rewards it, but because it is genuinely, structurally who he is. This is where the lesson becomes something more than just a nice idea about being kind. Mr. Poopy Butthole has every reason, by any conventional accounting, to become bitter, to adopt Rick's worldview, to decide that caring and openness lead to getting shot, and that the obvious lesson is to stop. And he does not. He continues to be warm, not as a strategy, as an identity. Real kindness, the show is saying, is not soft. It is not the absence of complexity or difficulty or pain. It is the decision, made in full awareness of everything that could go wrong, to keep the warmth alive anyway, to keep meeting people where they are, to keep offering something that costs you something, because you have decided that this is the kind of person you want to be in the world, regardless of whether the world deserves it on any given day. In a show full of intelligent, ambitious, powerful characters, using their gifts in spectacular and often destructive ways, the character whose defining quality is simple human warmth is presented as the counter-argument to everything Rick believes about whether caring is worth it. He says it is. He says it every single time he shows up, and the show trusts you to hear him. Lesson 6, love is the thing you cannot outsmart. Rick Sanchez once dated a hive mind. This sounds like the setup to a joke, and in the hands of autoerotic assimilation, and it becomes one of the most honest explorations of love and loneliness that television has managed. Unity is a parasitic consciousness that has absorbed the population of an entire planet. It is a gestalt being made of thousands of individual bodies, all operating under one will, one awareness that stretches across every host it has taken. And it was Rick's ex. They have the specific, complicated chemistry of two entities who understood each other in ways that nobody else could, who brought out each other's most extreme qualities, who returned to each other repeatedly despite knowing on some level what the cost of returning always was. The episode watches their reunion with quiet, awful clarity. Rick pushes. Unity accommodates, Rick wants more. Unity adjusts its entire planetary civilization to provide it. An entire species, assimilated across years into a stable collective, begins to slip back toward chaos as Unity's attention redirects from its responsibilities to Rick's needs. The planet's population, freed temporarily from Unity's stabilizing influence, immediately begins fragmenting along old conflict lines. Rick does not notice. He is having a wonderful time. Unity's departure letter is the most psychologically sophisticated breakup note in the history of animated television. Written in the hands of dozens of individuals, each holding a piece of paper with a single sentence, it tells Rick that it is attracted to him for the same reason it cannot be with him, because Rick cannot change. Unity knows how it goes. It loses who it is and becomes part of Rick. Because Rick is, in a strange way, better at what Unity does without even trying. Rick turns everyone around him into versions of himself through influence rather than assimilation, and Unity cannot maintain its own identity in his gravitational field. The letter is not angry. It is heartbroken and clear-eyed in equal measure. Unity is not leaving because Rick is bad. It is leaving because Rick is Rick, completely and unchangeably Rick. And that completeness is not something that can be lived alongside without being consumed by it. Rick is too much of himself for anyone to remain fully themselves in his presence. That is both his greatest quality and his most isolating one. Rick comes home after reading this letter. He builds something in his lab. He tests it on a small creature. He places the device to his own head. And something goes wrong, or something in him hesitates at exactly the right moment. Yeah, and he is still alive when the camera finds him. He is face down on his desk. The lights are on. And the show ends on that image. The smartest man in the universe, unable to feel sorry for himself in any dignified way, alone in a way that even the infinite multiverse cannot resolve. That ending is the show saying something without a single word of dialogue. Rick Sanchez, across every dimension and every adventure and every spectacular escape, has never solved the specific problem of being a person who needs connection and cannot make himself ask for it, who needs love and cannot make himself be the kind of person love can reach, who has, in response to the catastrophic loss of the love he had, built himself into something so self-sufficient and so defended that the thing he is defending against can no longer get in, as including the parts that would have been healing. Love does not respond to intelligence. It does not respond to achievement. It is entirely indifferent to how impressive you are, how clever, how many problems you can solve. It responds to presence, to the willingness to be known, to the capacity to let someone in close enough to actually matter, which means close enough to actually hurt you, which is the part Rick cannot negotiate with. The tragedy is not that Rick is unlovable. The show makes clear that he is loved. Beth loves him despite everything. Morty loves him despite everything. Bird Person loved him with a completeness and a consistency that is rare in any universe. Rick is loved, and cannot let himself be loved. And the gap between those two facts is where his loneliness lives. This is not fictional. How's the person who is loved and cannot receive it? Who needs connection and cannot make themselves available to it? Who has decided in response to some prior damage that the safest thing is to need nothing, and therefore to be left with nothing, is one of the most common and most heartbreaking patterns in human life. And the show traces it with a specificity and honesty that is worth sitting with. Not because it offers a solution, because seeing the pattern clearly is the beginning of the only thing that could ever change it. You cannot outsmart love. You can only choose it or decline it. And every time Rick declines it, every time he runs before the feeling can land, every time he turns something tender into a joke, every time he opens a portal when what the moment called for was staying still, the show marks that choice as a cost. Not a judgment, a cost. And the question it is always quietly asking is whether the cost is worth what is being protected. And the answer it keeps arriving at, slowly and without triumph, is no. Lesson 7. The work nobody wants to do is the work that saves you. Dr. Wong deserves her own section because what she says to Rick in Pickle Rick is not just a diagnosis of one fictional character. It is a framework for understanding one of the most persistent problems in human life. The confrontation between Rick and Dr. Wong is masterfully written, not because it is dramatic or full of surprises, but because it is quiet and correct. Rick arrives in her office covered in rat blood, in full physical evidence of an extraordinary adventure he chose over a single therapy session. He is a pickle. He arrives in all of this glory, and he is still somehow completely certain that what he has just done was more dignified and more worthwhile than sitting in a chair and being asked how he is feeling. Dr. Wong does not argue. She simply reflects. She notes that he is the master of his universe and that he is dripping with filth, his enormous mind vegetating by his own hand. She tells him that the thing about repairing and maintaining is not an adventure. There is no way to do it so wrong that you might die. It is just work. Some people are okay going to work. Some people would rather die. Each of us gets to choose. Rick goes silent. The smartest man in the universe has no comeback because she is exactly right, and he knows it. The choice Dr. Wong is naming is one of the most consequential and least dramatic choices in a human life. Now, it is the choice between the maintenance work and everything else. The boring, repetitive, non-heroic work of keeping the things that matter in good repair versus the endless variety of more exciting alternatives that exist to distract from the maintenance. Adventures, projects, achievements, substances, screens. The constant forward motion of a life that is always becoming something and never quite being something. Because being something requires the kind of stillness and repetition and unglamorous consistency that the other options do not. Relationships require maintenance. Not the kind that looks good from the outside, not the grand gestures and the birthday celebrations and the dramatic steps up in moments of crisis. The kind that does not photograph well. The checking in when you do not have anything exciting to check in about. On the listening when you are tired and would rather not be listening. The choosing on an ordinary Tuesday to put down whatever you are doing and give your full attention to the person you love. Not because anything is wrong, but because the not wrong times are when the relationship is actually built. Your relationship with yourself requires maintenance too. The honest accounting of what you are actually feeling and why. The willingness to notice when something is wrong and to do something about it before it grows into the size that forces your hand. The practice of checking in with yourself the way you would check in with a person you care about, with the same patience and the same genuine interest in the answer. Rick does none of this. He is extraordinary at almost everything and genuinely terrible at this one specific thing. And the result is a life that is full of experience and almost entirely empty of continuity. He has done everything. He has maintained almost nothing. The people who love him love a Rick who is only partially available, who fills the time between maintenance moments with spectacular substitutes that leave no room for the thing that would actually help. The lesson is deceptively simple. The things in your life that matter most are not maintained by dramatic gestures. They are maintained by the small, boring, consistent choices to show up that accumulate over time into something that holds. The daily practice of being present, the regular honesty, the unglamorous work of simply being reliably available to the people who have made space for you. This is the work nobody wants to do. It is slow. It does not produce anything that can be pointed to. It does not make a good story. But it is the work that builds the only things worth having. Do the boring work. It is the only work that saves anything. Lesson 8. Purpose is what makes existence bearable. Let us talk about Mr. Meeseeks. The premise is elegant in its simplicity. You press a button on a box. A tall blue creature appears, cheerful and immediately focused. You give it a task, it completes the task, and then it ceases to exist. That is the entire structure of a Meeseek's life. Birth, purpose, completion, end. No childhood, no development, no relationship with the world beyond the specific task it was summoned to accomplish. And the crucial detail, a Meeseeks wants exactly this. It is specifically, perfectly, enviably calibrated for exactly what it has. On a purpose, a finish line, a moment when it gets to stop. The show tells us in one of its most quoted lines that existence is pain for a Meeseeks. Every moment of being alive is uncomfortable for them in a way their structure was never designed to sustain indefinitely. The only relief available is the completion of the task. This is not incidental. The task is not just something they do. It is the reason they can endure existing at all. The purpose makes the pain bearable by giving it a direction and an end. The episode then gives us Jerry. Jerry cannot improve his golf game. He is too bad at golf, too resistant to changing anything fundamental about his approach. The Meeseeks assigned to help him is trapped. The task is taking too long. A Meeseeks that has been alive for too long, existing in pain without completion in sight, begins to come apart at the seams. It summons another Meeseeks to help. That one summons another. And soon there is a crowd of them, all trapped in the excruciating state of extended existence without purpose fulfillment, all slowly losing the cheerful helpfulness that was their essential nature. Their smiles collapse into desperation. Their willingness to assist curdles into rage. By the end, they are threatening to kill Jerry because they have determined that if they cannot complete the task, eliminating the person who gave them the task might count as resolution. The show is using this comic premise to explore something older and more serious than it might appear. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camp, spent his career investigating what makes human existence bearable. His answer: get developed through observation in conditions of extremity that most people will never know, was that the people who survived, who maintained their humanity and their will to live in circumstances designed to strip both away, were the ones who had something to live for. A purpose, however small or however personal, that made getting through today feel like it was in service of something. The Meeseeks have this built in. They emerge into consciousness already knowing what they are for and when they get to stop. This the show presents with its particular dark humor is both the most enviable and the most troubling thing about them. Enviable because most humans spend enormous portions of their lives searching for the clarity that Meeseeks have from birth. Troubling because the purpose was installed by someone else, bought for someone else's convenience, without any input from the being created to serve it. Rick designed the Meeseeks. He decided that existence would be painful for them, and he gave them task focus, not as a gift, but as a management strategy. The compulsion is not natural. It was engineered by an external intelligence with its own agenda. And the episode, while playing everything as comedy, asks you to notice something. What if the purposes you have been given, the tasks that give your existence structure and direction, were also, in some sense, installed by external forces? By family expectation, by cultural programming, by the economic systems you were born into? The question is not whether purpose is valuable. It is clearly demonstrably valuable. The question is whether the purpose you have is yours. Whether you chose it from a place of genuine self-knowledge, or whether you inherited it and forgot to examine it, and now it is running your life in the background like a program someone else wrote. A meeseeks without its compulsion would be a being adrift in existence with no frame. The discomfort continues, but the thing that made it bearable has been removed. Suffering with no direction eventually turns outward. The meeseeks that cannot complete Jerry's golf task do not become peaceful. They become violent. The invitation the show extends is to take the question of purpose seriously, not as a grand philosophical project to be solved in a single breakthrough moment, but as an ongoing practice of honest attention. What is the thing that makes your being here feel oriented? What gets you through the difficult parts because you can see that they are in service of something? And if you cannot find an answer right now, what would it look like to start building one, slowly, with the materials you actually have? Purpose, the show suggests through the meeseeks and their tragedy, is not a luxury. It is infrastructure. And when it is missing, everything else that depends on it begins to fail. Lesson 9. The cage you can see is the one you can break. There is a Morty in Rick and Morty who is different from all the others. He has an eye patch. He is calm in situations where every other Morty panics. He is the most dangerous person in the multiverse. Not because he has weapons or armies, because he sees the cage clearly and has the patience and the ambition to dismantle it from the inside. The cage is called the Central Finite Curve. It is a barrier that separates the universes where Rick is the smartest being alive from the universes where he is not. Every dimension inside the curve has been shaped and curated to ensure that a Rick is always on top. The Citadel of Ricks, the civilization built by and for Ricks from across the multiverse, exists inside the curve. Every power structure, every civilization, every system that Rick has ever interacted with exists inside a reality engineered to keep Rick at the center. The whole multiverse, or at least the subset of it that Rick has ever inhabited, is a Rick-shaped make. And every Morty who has ever lived inside that cage has accepted it as simply the way things are. Not because they are stupid, not because they do not feel the constraints, but because the cage is so total, so comprehensive, so woven into every aspect of the world they know, that questioning it feels like questioning reality itself. Rick's lead, Morty's follow. This is not presented as a system. It is presented as natural law. Evil Morty is the one who names it, who maps its edges, understands it mechanically, understands what it would take to break it, and then spends years of patient, disciplined work building toward the single act that will accomplish that. Getting access to enough power and technology to punch through the barrier and leave. The first time we see Evil Morty, he appears to be a victim. A Morty among many Mortys who have been kidnapped and abused. Rick and our Morty get involved in the investigation, and at the end, the camera reveals that the villain, the Rick who had been doing terrible things to Mortys, he was being controlled. He was a puppet, and the one pulling the strings was not another Rick. It was a Morty. Evil Morty. Standing right there in the crowd, hiding in plain sight. Invisible because nobody suspected that a Morty could be in charge of anything. When he shows up at the Citadel and runs for president, the Ricks do not take him seriously. A Morty running for president is, to them, a joke. They cannot imagine in their arrogance that a Morty could actually win. And they are wrong. Evil Morty campaigns. He speaks to the Mortys, who are second-class citizens by design at the Citadel, educated in schools that teach them to be better followers. He tells them what they already know. The system is not fair. It was built to benefit someone else. And the Mortys hear this, and they respond, and Evil Morty becomes president. But winning the election was not his goal. It was a step. He uses the presidency for one purpose, to break the central finite curve from the inside, to tear a hole in the barrier that has kept every Morty in every universe living in a reality designed to guarantee Rick's primacy, and then to leave. The scene is stunning. The Citadel is falling apart. Ricks and Mortys are dying. The entire civilization built by the self-declared smartest beings in any universe is consuming itself. And Evil Morty walks through it without breaking stride, gets into his ship, and flies through the gap in the curve into the open multiverse beyond. The multiverse where Rick is not always on top. The multiverse where a Morty might have a chance that is not defined in advance by who his grandfather is. He is gone. The curve is broken. The lesson embedded here is about systems and the limits of how far inside them you can see. Every person lives inside multiple systems that shape what feels possible and what does not. Some of those constraints are real. Others are just stories, told so consistently and for so long that they have become indistinguishable from physical law. The family dynamic that tells you certain things are not done in this house. The professional world that tells you people like you do not usually do things like that. The internal story you carry about what you are capable of, a story written mostly by other people in circumstances you did not choose. Running quietly in the background of every decision you have ever made without ever being examined. Evil Morty did not need to become president of the Citadel to find the lesson here. He needed to see the cage as a cage. Once he saw that, the rest followed slowly, patiently, at great cost from the clarity of that seeing. The gentler version of this lesson is simply this. Look at the walls you are living inside carefully enough to see which ones are structural and which ones are just convention. Look at the assigned role you have been playing in your family, in your relationships, in your own internal narrative, and consider whether you chose it or whether it was given to you before you were old enough to question the giving. The cage you can see is the one you can break, or step around. Or, if you are very patient and very clear-eyed and willing to do the work that requires, dismantle piece by piece from the inside. You do not have to be Evil Morty to do this. You just have to be honest enough to see what you are inside of, and brave enough to decide that the walls are not the last word on who you get to be. Lesson 10. What we protect and what we fear are the same thing. Somewhere across all of the lessons we have covered, there is a thread connecting all of them that the show has been tracing from the very beginning. The thing each character protects most fiercely is also, almost always, the thing they are most afraid of losing. The armor and the wound are made of the same material. Rick protects his intelligence. He wraps himself in it, uses it to justify everything he does and everything he avoids doing. And what he fears, at the deepest available level, is being ordinary, being just a man, being a regular person with regular pain and no spectacular capacity to manage it. The intelligence is not just a gift. It is the shield against the version of himself he cannot bear to look at. The version who lost Diane and did not handle it with any grace and has spent decades making the people around him pay for that failure in ways both large and small. Morty protects his anxiety, his hesitation, the voice that says this is a bad idea and maybe we should think about this. And what he fears is becoming someone who does not have that voice anymore. Someone for whom nothing registers as loss. As the seasons pass and Morty becomes more comfortable with the uncomfortable things, the show watches carefully and frames every step of that desensitization as a small tragedy. The anxiety is not just a symptom of trauma, it is the measure of how much Morty cares. Now, the day it goes quiet is the day something essential about Morty has been used up. Beth protects the image of competence, the decisive surgeon, the functioning adult, the woman who does not need anything from anyone. And what she fears, carved into her by her father's repeated departures, is that if she shows the parts that are not competent and not controlled, the small girl who waited for a father who kept leaving, who built her entire adult life in response to that waiting, she will be left again. The performance is not vanity. It is a system built in childhood to prevent a specific repetition of a specific pain. Jerry protects his smallness. He makes himself as undemanding as possible. He folds into whatever shape is required. Yet he avoids conflict with the consistency of someone who has decided that conflict leads to outcomes too terrible to risk. And what he fears is almost too direct to look at, that if he ever truly showed up for himself, truly demanded to be seen as a person worth taking seriously, everyone would look at him clearly and conclude that the verdict is no. So he stays small and calls it kindness and carries the weight of all the things he never said. Summer protects her coolness, the performance of someone who belongs everywhere and is bothered by nothing. And what she fears underneath the performance is exactly what she was told in her most vulnerable moment, that her being here was not necessary, that the world would have been fine, possibly better without her, that she is optional. The coolness is the daily counter-argument to that fear, that's performed for an audience that does not know it is an argument. Every character in this show is wearing armor made from their deepest fear. The armor looks different in each case: genius, anxiety, competence, smallness, confidence, but the structure is the same. And the show tells us, through Scary Terry, of all people, the least likely philosopher in any universe, that this is true. That the most terrifying exterior sometimes houses the most fragile interior. That what we perform for the world and what we actually are can be radically, sometimes heartbreakingly, different. Scary Terry is the show's purest distillation of this truth. He is terror personified, and he is having nightmares about not being scary enough. The thing that makes him frightening is the thing he is afraid he is losing. The armor is the wound wearing a costume. And the moment someone met the wound underneath the costume with kindness, instead of the fear it was designed to provoke, the whole structure transformed. The thing built to make people run became the thing that made an ally. This is the deepest lesson of the whole series, the one that contains all the others. You are not your armor. You are the person the armor is protecting. And the armor, while it has served you, while it has kept you functional and upright through things that might have broken you otherwise, is also the thing standing between you and the connections and the honesty and the life that you actually want. The show does not tell you to take the armor off all at once. It knows better than that. Armor is built slowly, in response to real things that happened, and it comes off slowly too. In conditions of sufficient safety, with people who have earned the trust that earning requires. The taking off of armor is not a single brave moment. It is a practice, a gradual and imperfect and sometimes backsliding process of letting more light in, a little at a time, and finding that the light does not, in fact, destroy you. What the show offers across all of its noise and chaos and portal gun adventures is simply a space in which that process is visible. In which characters who are entirely armored are shown both the cost of those defenses and the possibility of something different. Rick almost manages it sometimes in the later seasons. He gets close. He lets people in a little further than he intended. He chooses his family over his revenge, more than once in ways that cost him something. Those moments are the most hopeful things in the entire show. Not because they are triumphant, because they are small. Because the show understands that this kind of change does not arrive in grand gestures. It arrives in the smallest possible moments of choosing presence over escape, staying over running, truth over performance. The armor is worth noticing, and the noticing, the simple act of seeing clearly that it is there and that it has a shape and that its shape is made from specific fears about specific things, that is the beginning of the only kind of freedom that actually matters. Not the freedom to go anywhere in the multiverse. The freedom to be somewhere fully, without always being half gone. To be present in a life that is not grand or spectacular or cosmically significant, but is yours and is real and contains, if you let it, more than enough. Conclusion. What the show was really saying all along. We have been in this garage a long time now. The portal gun is on the workbench. Rick's experiments are half finished on the shelves. Morty is somewhere in the house, probably worrying about something, probably doing it alongside a kind of courage that he will never quite get credit for. Beth is at work or at home, carrying the complicated weight of being her father's daughter, in a world that does not quite have a word for what that costs. Summer is somewhere too, performing confidence that is real enough to be worth performing. Jerry is surviving another day, finding small moments of genuine joy in the things everyone else has decided are beneath notice. And Rick is here, sitting in his chair, probably drinking something, probably pretending not to care about any of it, while caring about all of it in ways he will spend the rest of his life finding indirect and deniable ways to express. Rick and Morty is a show about a lot of things. It is about science fiction, about adventure, about interdimensional politics and alien civilizations, and the infinite strangeness of a universe that is larger and stranger and more indifferent than human beings were designed to process. It is about comedy, about the specific kind of humor that comes from looking directly at things that are terrifying and absurd and finding the joke without losing the honesty. It is about family in all the messy, unresolvable, sometimes beautiful, and often painful ways that families actually work. But underneath all of that, underneath every adventure and every invention and every alternate reality and every spectacular escape, it is about a very simple and very old question. The same question that philosophers and poets and ordinary people lying awake at 3 in the morning have been asking forever. How do you live a good life when you know what you know? When you know the universe is vast and indifferent, when you know that nothing is guaranteed and most things end badly, and the people you love will leave or be lost or change into people you do not entirely recognize. When you know that your intelligence is not sufficient protection against any of the things that hurt the most. When you know in your bones that the life you have is probably not the life you imagined you would have, and that the person you have become is carrying things that the person you intended to become was never supposed to carry. How do you live with that? What do you do with it? The show's answer, delivered across its run through the voices of a drunk genius and his anxious grandson and everyone in the orbit of their particular chaos, is not triumphant. It is not simple. It does not fit on a motivational poster. It is more honest and more useful than that. You do the work, the boring, unglamorous work of maintaining the things that matter. You stop running long enough to turn around and see what has been following you. You let the people who love you get close enough to actually matter. You find the thing that makes the weight of existing feel oriented toward something. You look at the cage you are in clearly enough to see where the edges are. You stay afraid, because fear is not your enemy. Fear is the measure of how much something matters to you, and a life without it would be a life in which nothing was at stake. You do not have to be Rick. You do not have to be the smartest being in any universe, and you definitely do not want to be the loneliest. You can be the person who chooses the small, ordinary, achingly real moment over the spectacular escape. The person who says the difficult thing instead of turning themselves into a pickle to avoid it. The person who picks up the phone and calls someone they have been missing, even without knowing exactly what to say. To the person who sits down with the uncomfortable feeling instead of turning on the television, or opening a portal, or building another invention to prove that their mind has value even when they are not sure the rest of them does. You can be Morty, who is afraid of everything and shows up anyway. You can be Bird Person, who chooses loyalty even when loyalty costs everything. You can be Mr. Poopy Butthole, who gets shot and gets back up and keeps being warm because warmth is who he is and not just what the circumstances allow. You can be Summer, who earns her place by refusing to be left out of her own story. Jerry, who survives everything that was supposed to flatten him and still finds something worth being glad about. Beth, who is complicated and imperfect and loving in the ways she has learned to love, which are the only ways available to her, which are enough. You can be the person who, sitting in whatever garage is yours, looks at the portal gun, gathering dust on the shelf and thinks, I do not need to go anywhere. Everything I have been looking for across every possible version of my life is already in this room, if I am willing to see it. The smartest thing in the multiverse is not the portal gun. It is not the Meeseeks box or the neutrino bomb or the anti-gravity boots. It is the very ordinary, very difficult, very human decision to stay. To be present, to do the work, to let the people you love be as close as they are asking to be, and to trust that the closeness will not destroy you, and to find out slowly and imperfectly and in the company of imperfect people who are also trying, that it will not. Stay, be here, do the work, and maybe, while you are doing all of that, put on some interdimensional cable. Summer and Morty are watching something in the other room. Rick says it is stupid, which probably means it is perfect. The world can be a lot, and sometimes what it calls for is just being together in a room, letting the noise of the universe recede for a little while, choosing to be here instead of anywhere else. This is the beginning of everything the show ever wanted to say. Not the end. The beginning. Nobody exists on purpose. Nobody belongs anywhere. Everybody's going to die. Come watch TV. If this video meant something to you, if it landed somewhere, if it gave you something to carry into the rest of your day or your week or your life, please consider subscribing to Q Pickle Rick. It genuinely helps us make more of these. Now, it helps us keep going, keep exploring these stories that somehow, against all odds, manage to say true things in a universe full of portals and pickles and alien governments. We are grateful you were here. We are grateful for every single person who settled in and stayed for the whole thing. We will see you in the next one. End of script. Extended reflection on Rick Sanchez and the nature of grief. We have talked about Rick's intelligence, about his running, about the way he uses cleverness as a shield against the things that require a different kind of strength. But I want to spend more time with grief specifically, because grief is the engine underneath Rick's entire existence. And the show's handling of it is more sophisticated and more patient than almost any other piece of popular media has managed. Grief is not a topic that most entertainment handles well. The popular version of grief is clean. You lose someone, you cry, you have a period of sadness, and then you emerge into a new equilibrium where you carry the memory of the lost person as something warm and instructive. The grief teaches you something. It clarifies your values. It makes you appreciate the people you still have. And eventually it fades enough that you can speak about the person you lost without the weight becoming unbearable. Rick's grief does not look like this at all. Rick's grief looks like a decision. Not a conscious one, not a carefully reasoned choice, but a fundamental shift in orientation that happened in response to a trauma that was too large to process cleanly. And that has been running in the background of everything he does ever since. Rick decided, somewhere in the aftermath of losing Diane and Beth, that he was going to make sure that nothing could ever take anything from him again. And the only way to guarantee that was to ensure that he had nothing, that he needed nothing, that the people around him were useful rather than necessary, entertaining rather than essential, temporary rather than permanent. He has spent decades living in the consequences of that decision, without ever quite naming what the decision was. There is a moment in Season 6 that puts a point on all of this in a way that is almost unbearable to watch if you understand what you are looking at. Rick returns to his original dimension, Dimension C-137, the one where Diane and Beth were killed, the one he abandoned after the loss. And he finds, in the house where they died, a robot he built in the image of Diane. Not a robot designed to comfort him, a robot designed to torment him. It speaks with Diane's voice. It knows his failures. It reminds him every time he returns of what he lost and how. He built his grief a body and kept it running in an empty house in a dimension he does not visit, as a kind of self-punishment, as a way of ensuring that the wound never fully closes. This is not melodrama. This is what unprocessed grief actually does, when it has decades and unlimited resources to work with. It does not soften into memory. It calcifies into structure. It becomes part of the architecture of the person carrying it, load-bearing in ways they may not even fully recognize, affecting everything without being examined at all. Rick refuses for most of the show to examine it. He deflects every approach to the subject. When Mr. Nimbus mentions Diane by name in the Season 5 premiere, Rick's response is immediate and instinctive. Do not establish canonical backstory with me. The meta-humor in that line is on the surface. The genuine protective reflex underneath it is the real content. Rick cannot bear to have Diane spoken of because speaking of her makes her present in a way that requires him to feel the loss, and feeling the loss is the one thing he has spent his entire life arranging not to do. The show is not unsympathetic to this. It presents Rick's grief not as a character flaw, but as a wound. A real, deep, legitimate wound that was inflicted by circumstances that were genuinely terrible. He loved Diane. He chose his family over the multiverse. And the multiverse punished him for it by taking his family. The bitterness and the armor and the nihilism that followed are not inexplicable. They are the specific emotional response of a specific person to a loss that was both enormous and preventable, and the knowledge that it was preventable, that a different version of himself might have been able to stop it, is the thing that makes the wound impossible to simply accept and move past. What the show is asking about all of this, over the course of its run, is a question that applies well beyond Rick's fictional situation. How long do you get to carry a wound before it becomes a choice? At what point does the protection you built in response to real pain become the thing that is doing the damage now? When does the armor stop being a response to something that happened and start being a pattern that is happening continuously, every day, in the form of the connections you do not make, and the vulnerability you do not allow, and the life you are not quite letting yourself have? There is no clean answer to this. Grief does not operate on a schedule. The people who have lost someone essential know that the loss does not become smaller with time so much as the rest of life gets built up around it, so that eventually it is not that the grief is gone, but that there is more alongside it. More reasons to be here. More things that require your attention. More love that has arrived and needs somewhere to go. Rick never builds up the alongside, i.e., and he keeps everything at a distance that prevents the accumulation of things that would require him to stay. And so the grief remains the same size it always was, in a life that has not grown up around it, and it is still doing the work of driving every decision and defining every relationship, and making him unafraid of physical death, while making him terrified of emotional exposure. The invitation the show makes, quietly and without sentimentality, is for Rick to do the thing that he has never done. Not to get over it, not to leave it behind, but to let it be what it is, a loss that was real and that cost something that cannot be replaced. And to let that be true without letting it be the only true thing. To let Morty matter the way Morty wants to matter. To let Beth in further than he has let her. And to stop measuring every possible attachment against the risk of losing it, and to simply let the attachment be what it is, which is worth having even if it is temporary, which everything always is. The show suggests, in its late seasons, that Rick is beginning to find his way toward this. Imperfectly, sideways, with enormous resistance and frequent backsliding, but moving just a little in the direction of a life that contains more than grief and genius, and the spectacular substitutes for everything else. That is enough. That is, for a person who has been where Rick has been, more than enough. Not a triumphant arrival, but a small, real step. The smallest, most difficult, most meaningful kind. Extended reflection on Morty's growth and what it costs. We established earlier that Morty's anxiety is not a weakness, but a kind of moral compass, and that his fear is the measure of his caring. But Morty's arc across the series deserves a fuller accounting, because it is one of the most sustained and honest portraits of what it actually looks like to be shaped by experiences you did not choose. Morty at the beginning of the show is a kid. He is 14 years old, he is bad at school, he has a crush on a girl named Jessica who barely knows he exists, and he is worried about things in the way that 14-year-olds are worried about things, which is to say he is worried about everything but mostly about small, immediate, personal things. Whether Jessica will notice him, whether his parents will stop fighting, whether he can get through the school day without anything catastrophic happening. And then Rick arrives in his life, and the scale of what Morty is worried about expands at a pace that his nervous system is simply not equipped to handle. By the end of the first season, Morty has buried his own dead body in the backyard of an alternate dimension and moved into the life of a version of himself who is no longer alive. By the end of the second season, he has watched entire civilizations be used and discarded. By the third season, he has begun erasing memories of things too terrible to carry consciously. The show never pretends that this is fine. It never presents Morty's increasing capability with dangerous situations as straightforward growth, as a kid learning to handle things that adults handle. But it presents it as what it is, a child being exposed to things no child should be exposed to, developing coping mechanisms that are functional in the short term and corrosive in the long term, slowly losing the specific qualities that made him the most human character in the show. There is a Season 4 episode that makes this explicit in the most direct way the show has ever been direct about anything. Morty's Mind Blowers, which reveals the existence of the memory erasing device, is the show finally putting into words what it has been showing you for years. Rick has been curating Morty's memories, not as an act of cruelty, though the power dynamic in it is disturbing, as an act of what Rick probably experiences as protection. Rick knows what it costs to carry everything. He has been carrying his own version of everything for decades, and he does not want Morty to break under the weight of it. But the effect of erasing the worst memories is not that Morty heals. It is that Morty has gaps, absences without context, weights without sources. He carries the emotional residue of things he can no longer access the origin of, And the combination of the unprocessed and the inaccessible produces exactly the kind of dissociation that the show frames, carefully, as damage. Morty deserved better than this. Not because the adventures were wrong exactly, though many of them were, but because a person deserves the chance to process their own experiences, to integrate them, to understand what happened to them and how it affected them and what, if anything, they want to do with that understanding. Rick, in trying to protect Morty from his own history, then took away the tools Morty would have needed to actually be okay. This is another version of the show's argument about the maintenance work. You cannot skip the processing. You cannot protect someone from their own experiences by erasing the experiences. The weight remains. The shape of the thing remains. And without the memory to anchor it, the weight becomes inexplicable and the shape becomes something that the person cannot quite trace back to its source. What makes Morty compelling across the whole of the show is that he keeps trying. Despite everything that is done to him and around him and through him, he keeps trying to be the thing he recognizes as good. He keeps pushing back when Rick goes too far. He keeps insisting that people matter, that consequences are real, that the universe is not disposable even when Rick treats it like it is. He fails at this sometimes. He fails at it more often as the seasons go on and the weight accumulates, and the memories that might have told him why he is this way keep disappearing. But he keeps trying, and the show honors that trying in the most honest way it can, which is to show it without resolution. Morty does not arrive anywhere clean. He does not have an episode that gives him closure, or a relationship that fully heals, or a conversation with Rick that finally says the things that need saying. He just keeps showing up, in whatever damaged, imperfect, fear-driven form is available to him on any given day. He keeps being there. The lesson in Morty's arc is not as tidy as some of the others we have covered. It is not a prescription, it is a portrait. And the portrait says, the damage that life does to us is real, and the people we become in response to that damage are not fully our fault. And it is still possible, inside all of that, to be someone who keeps trying to be good. To keep choosing the right thing even imperfectly. To keep caring even when caring has cost you more than it was supposed to. Morty is not a hero in the traditional sense. He does not conquer his fears. He does not transform into someone invulnerable. He is just a kid, a grown-up kid, a deeply marked and imperfect and still trying kid, who shows up every week for a universe that keeps demanding things of him that he should not have to give. That is, the show gently suggests enough, more than enough, more in some ways than the universe deserves. But he gives it anyway because he is Morty, and that is what Morty does. Extended reflection on Beth Smith and the cost of being chosen. Beth Smith is not a villain. She is not entirely a victim. She is something more complicated and more interesting than either. She is a person who was shaped by an absence and who has been trying her entire adult life to build something stable on top of the hole that absence left. Rick left when Beth was a child. The show does not pin down the exact age or the exact circumstances, but the emotional reality is clear. Beth grew up without her father, without the presence of the person she most wanted to be like and most wanted to be seen by. And she built her entire identity in the negative space of that absence. She became whatever she thought would make him stay if he came back. She became competent, she became clever, that she became the kind of person who does not need anything from anyone, who can handle whatever arrives, who does not ask for things she might not get. She built herself into a version of Rick that could function in the ordinary world. And then Rick came back. And everything she had built to survive his absence was suddenly in direct contact with its origin. And the contact was extraordinary and terrible and full of love and full of damage in exactly equal measure. The dynamic that develops between Beth and Rick in the house is one of the show's most honestly rendered relationships. Beth wants Rick's approval in the specific, wordless, bone-deep way that a child wants the approval of the parent who left. Not logically, not as an adult assessment of whether Rick deserves to be a source of validation, but she wants it the way she wanted it when she was 7 years old, and the want has never been updated by the adult brain that has since developed on top of it. She overlooks things she should not overlook. She defends Rick when Jerry is right to be concerned. She allows her children to be used in ways that she would never accept if the person doing the using were anyone other than her father. All of this makes complete and devastating sense when you understand it through the lens of what attachment psychology calls the anxious attachment style. People who grew up with a parent who was inconsistently available, who came and went unpredictably, who gave warmth sometimes and withdrew it without warning, learn a specific response to love that is essentially, hold on as tightly as possible because this might disappear at any moment. And if you hold tight enough, maybe you can keep it from leaving again. Beth holds tight. She holds so tight that she cannot quite see what she is holding. She cannot see that her father's presence in the house is not the same thing as her father being available to her in the way she actually needs. She cannot see that making excuses for his behavior and defending his choices and orienting her entire life around whether he approves of her is not the same as being loved. She cannot see until the show forces her to look at it clearly, that she has organized her whole adult existence around a relationship that has never been able to give her what she was looking for, and that it might never be able to, not because Rick does not love her, but because Rick is not capable of expressing that love in the forms that would actually reach her. The episode The ABCs of Beth puts this in a direct light for perhaps the first time in the series. Rick builds Beth a pocket dimension as a child, a safe imaginative space where she can do whatever she wants without consequence. And what we discover is that Beth as a child was not simply creative or playful. She was dark. The things she created and the choices she made in Fruipyland suggest a child who is working through things that children should not have to work through, in the only space she had that felt entirely safe and entirely hers. A child who inherited from her father not just the intelligence, but the capacity for moral flexibility that Rick uses so casually, and that Beth has kept buried under layers of acceptable adult behavior. The show is suggesting something uncomfortable here, which is that Beth is more like Rick than anyone in the family wants to acknowledge, and that this likeness has been both her greatest strength and her most dangerous inheritance. She has his capability. She has his willingness to do what is necessary. She has his ability to look at hard situations and make the hard call. And she has his tendency to use those qualities in service of her own needs in ways that cost the people around her. The difference between Beth and Rick is that Beth has maintained the outer structure of a conventional adult life. She has the marriage and the children and the job and the house. She has kept the performance intact even when what is underneath it is considerably messier. Rick never bothered with the performance. He decided that the performance was not worth the effort of keeping up, and he has been living openly as exactly what he is, which has its own kind of integrity, even if everything else about his approach is problematic. Beth is living, in a sense, a double life. The person she presents to the world, to her children, to Jerry, and in certain ways to herself, is the competent, managing, coping adult woman who has things under control. And the person underneath that is someone who is still waiting in some corner of herself for her father to finally look at her and say the thing she has been waiting for her entire life to hear. I see you. I am proud of you. You matter to me more than the universe does. Rick may never be able to say that, not because it is not true, but because Rick, as we have established, has built around himself a structure that makes saying things like that almost impossible. And the tragedy of Beth's situation is that she may be waiting for something that she will not get in the form she needs it from this specific person, regardless of how much she reorganizes her life to make herself worth saying it to. The lesson the show is offering here is not a simple or comfortable one. It is not saying, stop hoping for what you want from the people who cannot give it to you. It is saying something more nuanced. See clearly what you are actually dealing with. See the specific shape of what your father is capable of and what he is not. See the ways in which organizing your life around an approval he may never be able to give is costing you things that could have gone elsewhere. And see with equal clarity that this is not your fault, that you built what you built because you were a child trying to survive. And children build what they can with what they have. And the structures they build in childhood do not come down just because you are an adult now and can see them more clearly. Beth is not healed by the end of the show. She is moving, slowly, towards something that looks more like self-knowledge, toward a version of herself that is not entirely organized around her father. That has its own center of gravity. That can love Rick clearly, including his limitations, without needing him to be something he cannot be in order for the love to feel safe. She is not there yet, but she is moving. And in a show that is mostly about people who are not moving, that counts. Extended reflection on Jerry Smith and the dignity of ordinary things. Jerry Smith is the most mocked character in the show. He is mocked by Rick, by Beth, by his children, by the universe at large. He is presented repeatedly and explicitly as someone who is not particularly intelligent, not particularly talented, not particularly capable of handling the extraordinary situations that become routine in the Smith household. He is, by every metric the show uses to assign value, on the lower end. He knows this. The show knows this. Everyone knows this. And yet, there is a philosopher named Viktor Frankl, whose work I mentioned earlier in this video, who spent his career studying what makes a human life worth living. Frankl himself survived Auschwitz and 3 other concentration camps. He came out of that experience with a conviction that he spent the rest of his life articulating. The meaning of a life is not determined by its achievements, and it is determined by the quality of attention and love with which it is lived. A person who lives with full attention and genuine love is living a meaningful life, regardless of whether that life would appear impressive to anyone looking at it from the outside. Jerry Smith, of all people, is the closest thing to this idea that the show produces. Jerry finds genuine delight in things that everyone else has decided are beneath notice. He celebrates small victories with a fullness of feeling that is, honestly, a little embarrassing to watch. Partly because of how much we have been trained to find that kind of uncomplicated joy humiliating. He loves his family in the most unsophisticated way imaginable, without strategy, without game playing, without the protective irony that everyone else in the household wraps their affection in. That he loves Beth even when she is contemptuous of him. He loves his kids even when they are embarrassed by him. He loves the ordinary texture of his days in ways that seem, to the other characters, like evidence of a limited imagination. But there is a moment in the show, brief and easily missed, that reframes Jerry completely. It comes from one of the academic analyses the show has inspired, which noted that while Rick looks everywhere for happiness and finds nothing, Jerry looks nowhere in particular and finds it everywhere. The Ricks of this world search across infinite dimensions for something that makes existence worthwhile and come up empty. The Jerrys of this world find it in a tile-tapping game, in winning a made-up award in a poorly constructed alien simulation, and in being genuinely pleased about getting a compliment from a stranger. The show presents this as comedy. Jerry's easy happiness is played for laughs, positioned as naivete as evidence of limited awareness about the actual nature of the universe. And Rick's bleak, searching unhappiness is positioned, most of the time, as the more sophisticated response. The more honest one. The one that comes with understanding things clearly. But the show, in its quieter moments, is not entirely sure about this. And the moments where it is least sure are the moments where it shows us what Rick's clear-eyed understanding has actually produced, which is a man alone at a desk, having barely survived something he almost did to himself. And the moments where it shows us what Jerry's limited understanding has produced, which is a man surrounded by people who have, at various points, chosen him, in some cases repeatedly, in some cases at significant cost to themselves. Beth chooses Jerry. At the end of Season 1, at the end of Season 2, at multiple points in subsequent seasons. She chooses him not because he is impressive or useful or capable in the ways Rick defines capability. She chooses him because he is there and he is consistent, and he loves her without conditions she has to constantly perform to meet. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, one of the things that humans most fundamentally need from each other, and one of the things that is hardest to find in a world that keeps telling us that extraordinary is the only version of valuable. Jerry is ordinary. He knows he is ordinary. He has been told he is ordinary so many times that it has seeped into him and become part of how he moves through the world. And he keeps showing up anyway, in all of his ordinariness, being precisely and completely the specific and limited and genuinely loving person that he is. And the show, for all of its mockery, cannot quite make the case that this is worse than the alternative. Cannot quite say with conviction that Rick's extraordinary capability and endless freedom and infinite intelligence is producing something better than Jerry's ordinary life, and genuine warmth and consistent presence. The lesson in Jerry is perhaps the show's most gently delivered one, offered mostly in between jokes and hidden under layers of justification for why you should not take Jerry seriously. It is this: the ordinary things are not beneath you. The small pleasures and the uncomplicated affections and the moments of genuine, unironic delight in things that do not require cosmic significance to be real. These things are not evidence of limited intelligence. They are evidence of a certain kind of wisdom that the show's more impressive characters spend their whole lives failing to achieve. The ability to be here in the small and ordinary version of things, and to find it enough. Not because you have given up on more, but because you have understood in some wordless and inarticulate way that this is where life actually lives. In the small places, in the ordinary moments, in the unremarkable joy of a tile-tapping game when you are having a good day. Jerry does not know how to be extraordinary. He knows how to be here. And the show, for all of its mockery, keeps returning to the fact that being here is harder and rarer and more valuable than it looks. Extended reflection on what Rick and Morty teaches about meaning. Let us come back, near the end of our time together, to the question the show is always circling. Does anything matter? Rick's answer, stated explicitly and frequently throughout the show's run, is no. Nothing matters. The universe is infinite and indifferent. Every civilization that has ever existed has been destroyed or will be. Every person who has ever lived has died or will. Every relationship ends, every achievement fades, every meaning that has ever been constructed has been or will be unmade by time and entropy and the inexorable operation of physical law. In the face of all of that, caring about anything is a kind of delusion, an uncomfortable story we tell ourselves to avoid the vertigo of the actual truth. This is Rick's position. He holds it consistently. He uses it to justify almost everything he does, from the genuinely harmless to the genuinely terrible. And the show, to its credit, does not simply disagree with Rick. It does not present a cheerful counterargument that undoes his nihilism. The universe that Rick and Morty is set in is genuinely as bleak as Rick says it is. Civilizations do get destroyed. People do get hurt in ways that cannot be undone. Relationships do end. The multiverse is genuinely vast and genuinely indifferent. But the show does disagree with the conclusion. And it disagrees with the conclusion not through argument, but through observation. That through simply showing you what a life lived entirely in accordance with Rick's conclusion looks like. A face down on a workbench. A home in a dimension that is not his original dimension. With a family that is not his original family. In a life that has been built entirely as a substitute for the one that was destroyed because he could not find a way to process the destruction. And through showing you what a life looks like when it is lived with Morty's approach instead. With fear and caring and the willingness to feel the weight of things. With anxiety about consequences. With the specific, embarrassing human quality of finding things worth getting upset about even in a universe that does not care. Morty's approach does not make him happy in any simple sense. His life is not easier than Rick's. It may, in certain objective ways, be harder. He carries more. He suffers more openly. He has less defense against the things the universe throws at him. But he has something that Rick does not have. He has relationships that are genuinely mutual. People who chose him, not because he is useful, but because he is Morty. A connection to the family that runs through shared experience rather than just shared address. A capacity for the specific kind of joy that requires vulnerability to access, which is the deepest kind. The show is suggesting, through this comparison, that the question is not whether things matter objectively. They do not. They cannot. The universe does not have a mechanism for mattering objectively. The question is whether you want to live in a universe where things matter because you have made them matter, but where the meaning is constructed rather than discovered, built through the daily choices about what you pay attention to and what you invest in and who you show up for. A constructed meaning is not a lesser meaning, it is the only kind available, and a person who chooses it with their eyes open is making a more honest choice than either the person who believes in a meaning they were given or the person who uses the absence of given meaning as a reason not to construct any. Rick has the intelligence to know that meaning is constructed. And he has used that knowledge as a reason not to construct it, because if he constructs it and then loses it again, the way he lost Diane, the loss will be unbearable. The constructed meaning becomes a trap, a vulnerability, a thing that can be taken, and so he does not construct it. Now he lives in a universe where nothing is allowed to matter very much, and wonders why everything feels empty. Morty does not have the intelligence to reason his way to this position. He just cares. He cares about Jessica and about his family and about the adventures and about the people they meet along the way. And he gets hurt by this caring regularly and comprehensively. And he keeps caring anyway because it is not a strategy. It is just who he is. And in being who he is, without the philosophical scaffolding to protect him from the vulnerability of it, Morty accidentally produces something that Rick, with all his genius, has failed to produce. A life that has things in it worth caring about. And the show's final answer to the question of whether anything matters is not delivered in a speech or a revelation or a moment of philosophical resolution. It is delivered through the accumulation of small moments across hundreds of episodes. The moments where someone chooses someone else, where someone shows up when they did not have to, where something small and ordinary and unremarkable becomes, in the specific context of this specific relationship, the thing that makes everything worth it. These moments do not prove anything cosmically. They do not answer Rick's nihilism on its own terms. But they exist. They keep happening. In a universe that is cold and vast and indifferent, inside a small house in a suburb, in the garage, in the living room, in the kitchen, these small warm things keep occurring between imperfect people who are trying their best with what they have. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. And the show knows this. It has always known this. It has just been waiting, episode after episode, for you to notice. Nobody exists on purpose. Nobody belongs anywhere. Everybody's going to die. The show does not argue with any of those statements. It simply appends one more. Come watch TV. Be here, together, in the small and ordinary and unremarkable and entirely real version of things. It is enough. It has always been enough. And if you made it all the way to the end of this video, if you have been here with me through all of it, then you already know what the invitation is. You already know what the show has been trying to say. Across all of its noise and all of its chaos and all of its portal guns and its pickles and its monsters and its moments of devastating, unexpected, completely earnest tenderness. Stay. Be here. Let the things that matter, matter. Let the people you love be as close as they are asking to be. The universe is big and cold and does not care. You do not have to match it. Extended reflection on the show's relationship with time and the cost of not being present. There is something the show does consistently and quietly that most viewers do not consciously notice, but that everyone feels at some point while watching it. It makes you aware of how fast things pass. Not in a heavy-handed way, not with slow music and lingering close-ups, but in the specific, an almost accidental way that comes from following characters across seasons and watching them change at a pace that mirrors real life more closely than most television does. Morty at the beginning of the show is a kid, a nervous, awkward, stammering 14-year-old who has never been anywhere more interesting than his own neighborhood. And then you blink, which is to say you watch a few seasons, and Morty is picking up weapons without flinching. He is making decisions that would have paralyzed the early version of him. He is less afraid of the things that used to terrify him and more afraid of things he cannot name, which is a far more adult kind of fear. The transition is not marked by a single moment. It happens the way things happen in real life, which is gradually and then all at once. Yeah, and you only really notice it when you look back and try to locate where the change began. Summer goes through the same thing in a different direction. She starts as the eye-rolling teenager upstairs, the one who would rather be anywhere than in this family's orbit, and she ends up becoming one of the most capable and decisive people in the household, someone who can handle situations that would genuinely break adults who had the benefit of normal childhoods. The journey from dismissive teenager to competent, emotionally complex young woman happens across so many episodes, in so many small moments, that it is easy to miss how far she has come until you look at where she started. Beth shifts. Jerry shifts. Rick, who spends most of the show actively resisting any shift at all, shifts in the ways that matter most. which are the slowest and the quietest and the hardest to track. The show is doing something with all of this that is worth naming directly. It is making an argument about presence, about what it costs to not be there. Rick was not there for most of Beth's childhood. He has been told this. He knows this. He carries it, though he would not use the word carry. The years he was absent from Beth's life are years she spent building herself around his absence, years that cannot be reclaimed, years that shaped her in ways that neither of them can fully undo, regardless of how much time they now spend in the same house. The missing time is not neutral. It did something. And no amount of later presence, however genuine, gets to override what the absence built. The show returns to this idea in different forms across its run. While Jerry misses things because he is distracted by his own insecurity, Beth misses things because she is oriented toward Rick rather than toward her children. Rick misses things by design, by deliberate arrangement, by a lifestyle that has been constructed from the beginning to prevent the kind of sustained presence that would require him to be accountable to people across time rather than just in the moment. The only character who is reliably, consistently present is Morty. And Morty's presence is not the result of wisdom or planning. It is the result of having nowhere else to go. He is dragged along. He is brought to things rather than choosing to show up for them. And yet, in being there, even involuntarily, he forms the bonds and the memories and the shared history that eventually becomes the most meaningful thing in Rick's life. Presence is not glamorous. It does not feel like an achievement in the moment. You do not receive credit for simply being in the room, for simply being available, for simply continuing to show up in the ordinary and unspectacular way that most of life actually asks for. The things that feel like achievements, the adventures and the inventions, and the moments of spectacular capability, these are the things that get noticed. These are the things Rick has organized his life around. These are the things the Citadel built its entire civilization to celebrate. But what the show returns to, quietly, persistently, in the spaces between the spectacle is the argument that the presence is the thing, the continuity, the accumulated weight of ordinary time spent in the same place with the same people, building up over years into something that is not spectacular, but is deeply, specifically real, something that cannot be portal gunned to or away from, something that simply is, for the people who were there for the long, ordinary middle of it, the substance of what their life has been made of. Rick's great tragedy is not that he is brilliant and lonely. It is that he is brilliant and lonely in ways that his brilliance could theoretically address, and he has chosen not to use it that way. He could build things that bring people closer. He could use his intelligence to do the work that Dr. Wong says he avoids. He could choose presence over escape every time that choice comes up, which it comes up every single day in any ordinary life. And he has not. He has chosen the portal gun over and over again. He has chosen the spectacular exit over the unglamorous stay, and the cost has been paid not by him, but by everyone who has waited for him to come back. The lesson that the show offers here is almost embarrassingly simple, which is perhaps why it is delivered across hundreds of episodes in layers of science fiction and dark comedy rather than stated directly. Be here. The here is where your life is. The here is where the people who need you are. The here is ordinary and often frustrating, and sometimes boring, and regularly difficult and full of things that are not the kinds of problems that respond to a portal gun. And it is where everything real is happening all the time, whether you show up for it or not. The choice is whether you are present for it or whether you find out later that it happened while you were somewhere else being spectacular. Rick and Morty is a show about a man who spent his life being spectacular and somewhere else. About the cost of that choice, about the family that was shaped by his absence and his returns, and his inability to quite let them matter the way they needed to. About the grandson who kept showing up anyway, who kept finding Rick worth going back to even when Rick made it hard, who gave Rick the thing that Rick had been protecting himself from his entire life, which is someone who chooses to be in the room with you, not because you are useful or impressive, but because they want to be there. That is the gift. That is the thing the show has been building toward. Not a revelation about the universe or a resolution to the central conflict or an answer to the question of whether anything matters. Just a 14-year-old kid who is scared of everything, sitting in a garage in a suburb, choosing to be there, choosing Rick again. And Rick, who has crossed dimensions and destroyed civilizations and outthought every threat the multiverse has ever produced, has not yet figured out how to respond to being chosen. He is still working on it, in small, imperfect, sideways ways. He is still working on it. The show is not finished. Neither are we. Neither are any of the real people who see themselves in Rick's deflections, or Morty's anxiety, or Beth's waiting, or Jerry's desperate, ordinary warmth. We are all still working on it, still figuring out what presence costs and what it gives, but still learning the difference between running and resting, between protecting yourself and isolating yourself, between intelligence and wisdom, between spectacle and meaning. The portal gun is always going to be right there. The question the show keeps asking, gently and then urgently and then gently again, is whether you want to use it right now, whether you are running towards something or away, whether the adventure is real or just another way of not having to sit with the quiet, difficult truth of the life that is already yours. You do not always have to go somewhere. Sometimes the bravest, hardest, most meaningful thing available to you is to stay in the room, to put the portal gun down, to turn to the person next to you, the one who keeps choosing to be there, and to choose them back. That is Rick and Morty's real final lesson. And the one hiding under all the others. The one that does not require infinite intelligence to grasp, only the specific and ordinary courage of a person who has decided that the here is worth being present for. Stay, be here. The rest will follow. If you have been here with me for this entire journey, from Rick's garage all the way to this quiet place at the end, thank you. It means more than you know. Please subscribe to Q Pickle Rick if you have not already, and come back for the next one. We will be here. We always will be.